Hello and welcome to our program. My name is June Watkins, and with me today is William A. Beardslee from the Process and Faith program. Hi, Dr. Beardslee, and thanks for being with us today.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
First, let me tell our viewers a little bit about you personally, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about the Process and Faith program. William Beardslee is director of the Process and Faith program, and he is the author of several books, the latest being one, a commentary on 1 Corinthians. He's the Charles Candler Professor of Religion Emeritus at Emory University. Dr. Beardslee, I understand that Process and Faith is located in Claremont, California, and it's also associated with or affiliated with the School of Theology at Claremont and Claremont Graduate School.
That's correct.
I was looking over the literature earlier to prepare for our little talk today, and I noticed there was something I was going to ask you a question about. What is meant by a world of isolated things, and how does that differ from process theology's view that the world is made up of value-filled events and related to one another as well as to the whole?
Well, we used to imagine that we were isolated individuals. A lot of Americans still think that way. And we used to think that the smaller building blocks of reality were like little billiard balls. Remember how we used to picture atoms that way? We know better today, and process thought helps us to see how we are related. Everybody's talking relationship today, and rightly so. But if we think that what is really there is not little hard billiard balls, but experiences that grow by being affected by other experiences, so that what makes up an experience is mostly other experiences that have happened before. There is freedom too. We're not just bound by the past. But process thought has this way of helping us to understand how we don't choose to be related, we're just related. That's the way we're built. And God is related too. God is affected by the world as well as God affects the world. With this model of how it is, we can do much better at thinking and acting in a related way.
That makes sense to me. The other question I had is, it seems like we're hearing so much lately, unfortunately, about conflict. You know, everybody seems to be polarized in separate camps: racism, classism, sexism. Does process theology have anything to offer to heal these dualisms?
I think a great deal. There's no magic wand. Conflict is a terrible fact in life. But if we realize that one of the big factors is how we tend to simplify and tend to want to experience only the things that we already know and are like us, that's a terrible impoverishment. The richer experience is the experience that pulls together contrasting or even seemingly conflicting elements and tries to learn something from each side. That is what we call the principle of contrast. And it is a wonderful way to rethink how we experience. God, too, experiences all the conflicts and tries to bring them into such harmony as is possible, not always possible. If we do that, I think we can make a fresh start. And we have some booklets that try to explore such difficult topics as abortion, suicide, teenage sexuality, forgiveness, and other things with this contrast approach.
So this isn't just theory then. It sounds like there's quite a bit of application to real life problems. It seems like process theology has quite a bit to offer the world. How do you reach people? You mentioned the booklets, but are there other ways to reach people with this important?
Well, our principal outreach is our magazine, Creative Transformation. It's a wonderful magazine. At the edge, the growing edge of religious life, we say, and I think that's really true. And then we have the booklets. We also make available, we sell to people a wide range of books and videos that help people understand this point of view. We have conferences from time to time. These are some of the things we're doing.
Sounds interesting, but it also sounds like quite a bit of work and very expensive. How does Process and Faith afford all those programs?
Well, it's a voluntary program. It's supported by the subscriptions to the magazine and by memberships. We have what we call memberships in Process and Faith, people who value this perspective and want to see some changes in this more, I think, creative direction. Join as members, and they pay more than just for a subscription. And then, of course, we have people who just make plain gifts to us. Those are the ways we keep going.
Thank you, Dr. Beardslee, for being with us today and sharing this important information with us about the Process and Faith program.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Process and Faith seems to me to be a group of people who are working very, very hard to bring about a better, healthier, truer way to understand the world. They are revisioning the world to affirm the underlying relatedness and connectedness of all events. If you or someone you know are interested in becoming a part of the Process and Faith program and receiving your own subscription to Process and Faith's publication, Creative Transformation, simply call the number on your screen. That number is 909-626-3521. That's extension 288. To order any of the Process and Faith resources, books, audio tapes, videotapes, or booklets, call 1-800-626-7821, extension 288. That would be any time 9 to 4 in that specific time. Dr. Beardslee, thank you again for being with us, and thank you for all the wonderful work that your organization does. Thank you for joining us today, and please call Process and Faith and start receiving your subscription and copies of the latest issue of Creative Transformation, as well as enjoying all the other benefits of membership to the Process and Faith program. Bye now.
Almost 4 decades ago, a shepherd wandering in a cave somewhere in the Middle East stumbled upon some ancient manuscripts that became known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they were in such bad shape, until now they've been illegible. But we can read them now thanks to some technology that was developed to peer at other planets.
In the time since the scrolls were found, they have deteriorated terribly. Some of them through mishandling, and others just because they've been removed from a hot, dry, below sea level environment. The only way now to get this information back from the scrolls is to use the infrared imaging, multispectral imaging.
For an ancient manuscript scholar, trying to read something like this is nearly impossible.
There's a whole lot of reasons why they're difficult to read.
But not so difficult if you're Dr. Greg Behrman at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena. Greg helps design imaging instruments for NASA's planetary probes. The data these instruments send back from space help scientists tell, for example, what the chemical composition of Saturn's rings is. Greg can use the same type of imaging technology to unveil what's written on an ancient manuscript, such as this scrap of Egyptian papyrus. Using a special camera, Greg can digitize an image of the papyrus and store it in a computer.
Let's try Fire 1. Oh, that's not bad looking.
Then, using public domain software, Greg can digitally illuminate the darkest smudge of ancient writing.
See, the advantage of doing it this way is that if you don't have it on film, you have it stored digitally. I mean, that's the way it comes out of the camera. And you can play all these kinds of games with it.
How does Greg shed this digital light onto such illegible writing?
We've restricted the wavelength region that we look at. We're not looking at it in the visible region, which is what we see with our eyes. We're looking in the infrared, and we're looking at a narrow region of the infrared. We're looking between 0.9 and 1 micron, or 900 nanometers to 1,000 nanometers. The human eye sees out to maybe 700, depending on the person.
Within the visible spectrum, that is light we can see, the ink and the paper reflect almost exactly the same amount of light. The result, no contrast, making it awfully hard to read. But now, if you could look at just the infrared light reflected off the specimen, the ink reflects much less light than the paper, making it very easy to read.
The best analogy, and the one that seems to work, is the following. Both snow and ice, snow and clouds rather, they look white when we look at them with a visible eye. Snow is white on the ground and clouds are white in the sky. But if you look in the infrared at certain wavelengths, snow looks black, but clouds still look white.
Now, after Greg heard about the sorry state of some of the Dead Sea Scrolls and suggested trying the same infrared analysis, he got this.
The most straightforward reading is he wrote the words of, and the third word is not visible here.
It wasn't visible because when the scroll was first unrolled almost 50 years ago, a scrap of parchment had stuck to it. But Greg simply used another infrared camera tuned to a different infrared frequency that can literally see past the top layer and see the light reflecting from the hidden layer underneath.
And it's a little difficult to read, but this is a nun, a vav, and a chet, and this is Noah. So it says he wrote the words of Noah.
So far, digital imaging has been used to decipher only 2 fragments of the scrolls. But what if it were applied to the thousands of scraps that are still unread? Would imaging mean revising current religious interpretations?
I don't think it's going to be anything that's going to change any religions as they exist today, but it'll be of great interest to scholars and people who are interested in the roots of our culture.
Some of the worst scrolls look like something left over from a barbecue, but even these are yielding their secrets to a new technology. This summer, a team sponsored by the Ancient Biblical Manuscript Center in California visited Jerusalem to work on a number of difficult fragments. Bruce Zuckerman and his brother Ken have been achieving highly successful infrared photographs of biblical manuscripts for some time. They've now got together with Gregory Bearman, a scientist from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at NASA. Greg uses a remote sensing camera first designed for space probes. He's programmed his software to tell the difference between the black ink of scribal writings and the black resulting from age and deterioration.
We can use the software to take an image of any exposure time at any wavelength that we want. And this device is what sets the wavelength, and the rest of this is just a very fancy camera of one sort. What did I say, 20 seconds?
20 seconds.
Open the shutter.
Really quick.
The first text they examined was an elaborate commentary in Aramaic on the book of Genesis.
The Genesis Apocryphon is about the worst case scenario we have. I can't imagine, although I haven't seen these up close and personal, I can't imagine that we're going to have any that are any worse than this.
The reason we continue to be fascinated by the scrolls is that they bring us close to our religious origins. This fragment contains passages from Genesis written in the 2nd century BC in the language Jesus would have spoken. When Greg's team recovers a text, we see a scribal hand of the kind Jesus would have read.
Now what it does is, after it takes an image, you don't see anything right away because the electronics, the image is still on the camera head, so to speak, and the data has to be moved off and put in a file and then put up on the display. And they're not really big images, they're 2 megabyte files, but it takes this thing a little bit of time to do it. It's covered with something that looks like, it's hard to say. It looks like there's a very thick cover of some sort on top of it. And again, you see nothing. This really isn't that bad.
I think it looks like somebody poured molasses on it. Right.
That's a good choice. It looks like molasses. There's some real simple things you can do at first. You can do something like that. and that brings the letters out.
What you notice is we have running text where before you didn't see anything. And that's running text.
Greg, why don't you use the zoom tool and zoom in on
In other words,
it?
we haven't lost any, as far as I can see, except where it tears. You see where it's torn?
I think where you see a crack running through here, I think that's an example probably of differential shrinkage, where it's literally pulling itself apart and then cracking right along there. And using imaging software, you can literally take those two and pinch them back together.
So this is a passage of the Genesis apocryphon that's never been seen before.
Well, I don't know if it's never been seen before, but it hadn't been seen for a long time. In every place where we've looked, where we have black on black, and I don't care how black it is, we've been reading clear text, and that's a pretty good result to get.
Work like this is a race against time. The scrolls have badly deteriorated in 50 years, and before long may be beyond the scope of any technology. Even now, the texts resist interpretation and are deliberately secretive.
Hi, I'm June Watkins, Director of Public Relations at the Center for Process Studies in Claremont, California. And for the next few minutes, I'm going to be speaking with John Quiring, who's Assistant Director of the Center for Process Studies. Dr. Quiring, how would you describe the work of the Center for Process Studies?
Well, I define the Center for Process Studies as a research center, or a think tank, as some prefer to call it, that focuses on interdisciplinary studies. We use the holistic relational philosophy of Alfred North Whitehead as a magnet to draw scholars from different disciplines together to both test Whitehead's philosophy and to apply it to current affairs, matters affecting the common good, and ultimately, we hope, some public policy. Again, I like to emphasize the word magnet because there are really two strands of process research. One is the ongoing development of Whitehead's thought, which comes out of the American pragmatic tradition of William James, John Dewey, Charles Saunders Peirce, Charles Hartshorne. The other side attempts to apply this to current events, the ecological crisis, race, class, gender issues, the current culture wars, I think, is going to be an area that we begin to focus on. So, again, I remember the word magnet.
Well, you emphasize the function of the Center for Process Studies then as a resource for scholars and students, but I understand that you also do a lot of conferences and seminars. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. Students can study process thought, you know, as they matriculate at the Claremont Graduate School or the School of Theology at Claremont. But lay people, visiting scholars, friends of the center come to our seminars. Usually they are a 2-hour afternoon event. Sometimes there's a all-day workshop on a Saturday. Sometimes we have conferences that last from 3 to 5 days. It all depends on the amount of interest that people show, amount of funding, support we get for our activities. But all of these projects generate fresh research, unpublished papers. We have a publication series published by the SUNY Press, constructive postmodern thought generated as an alternative to the mainstream deconstructive postmodern thought. Then we have the Process and Faith program, which focuses on process theology, applies that theology to the needs of churches and religious educators. They have a publication called Creative Transformation. They have a publishing series called Hard Issues that deals with the most controversial issues of our day, abortion, homosexuality, capitalism, teen sexuality, parenting, all the hot button issues that you read about in the newspaper and hear on the radio and the news every day.
And what about the library at the Center for Process Studies?
Our library consists of any work that's been published that attempts to employ Whitehead or Hartshorne or John Cobb or David Griffin, William Beardslee, Marjorie Suhaki, Mary Elizabeth Moore, any of the process theologians and philosophers. We have to restrict ourselves to a certain range of holdings. We can't hold everything, although we're interested in everything. We have about 7,000 published and unpublished papers.
Unpublished?
The unpublished papers come out of our conference series and our seminar series, and we make those papers available to members. Of course, all these materials are available to anyone through membership or subscription.
In the minute that remains, is there any aspect of the center that you'd like to speak more about?
Well, I think right now we're looking at two related problems. I mentioned the culture wars, which is sort of the popular manifestation of a kind of dualism. I'd say what attracted me originally to process thought was its attempt to heal dualisms, not by finding a dead center or splitting the difference between the left and the right, but integrating the real truth and the real value that you find on issues that are characterized as left, issues that are characterized as right. So we look to the mediation role of process theology, process philosophy, and what we call transdisciplinary process thought, which again addresses the so-called disciplinary wars in academia, where the sciences are split off from the humanities, and each one science is split off from the other sciences, and each one thinks it's superior, and so forth. So we try to get beyond that, to think freshly about current problems, the environment, race, class, gender issues. And that takes a lot of doing to bring people together, to get them to relax, set aside their sometimes overemphasis, almost idolatrous emphasis on a particular perspective. So that's where the sort of the spiritual emphasis, spiritual dimension of process thought comes in. It helps us to get beyond these ideological and disciplinary idolatries.
Sounds like important work, especially in today's world. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
If you'd like more information about the Center for Process Studies, please write for our brochure. We'll be glad to send it out to you. The address for you to write to is 1325 North College Avenue, Claremont, California, and that's 91711. You can also call us anytime during the day, 9 to 4 Pacific time, and the phone number is 909-621-5330. We also have email available, so go ahead and give us an email. Our address is process, that's PROCESS, @cgs.edu. Thank you very much for being with us today, and thank you, Dr. Quiring.
Thank you.